On a desolate stretch of interstate highway, a story of unexpected connection is about to unfold. When a struggling truck driver, Jackson Cole, spots a stranded woman seeking a ride, he sees only someone in need, just another traveler, facing hard times like himself. Despite barely making ends meet with rising fuel costs and mounting bills, he follows his heart and offers her a seat in his rig. What he doesn't know is that the woman, Katherine Morgan, isn't just another face in the crowd. She's the billionaire CEO of Aurora Technologies, traveling incognito to escape the suffocating pressures of her corporate empire. As the miles roll by beneath 18 wheels, these two souls from vastly different worlds discover something neither expected to find: genuine understanding. But this isn't just a chance encounter. It's about to become a journey that challenges everything they thought they knew about love, worth, and the true meaning of wealth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dashboard lights cast a soft blue glow across Jackson Cole's weathered hands as his 18-wheeler cut through the darkness. The old Peterbilt's engine hummed a familiar tune, one he'd known since he was a boy riding alongside his father. These days, that comforting sound carried an undertone of worry. The engine wasn't running as smooth as it used to, and Jackson knew every rattle and knock meant another repair bill he couldn't afford. 3 generations of Coles had lived their lives on these highways. His grandfather started with a single truck in '62, hauling produce from California to Chicago. His father expanded the fleet to 5 trucks, building coal transport into a respected family business. Now, 20 years later, Jackson was the last Cole still driving, watching as rising costs and corporate competition slowly squeezed out independent operators like himself. The divorce papers sitting in his glove compartment didn't help either. Sarah had tried to understand the life, the long hours, the missed anniversaries, the constant struggle to keep the business afloat. But after 15 years, she'd had enough. "I can't compete with the road," she'd said during their last fight. Maybe she was right. Jackson glanced at the fuel gauge and grimaced. Diesel prices had jumped again last week, taking another bite out of his already thin margins. The truck payment was due in 3 days, and the recent transmission repair had drained his emergency fund. He'd been picking up extra runs, pushing himself to the limit of legal driving hours, but it never seemed enough. His phone buzzed, a message from his sister Linda. "Dad's asking about the business again. Should I tell him?" Jackson's throat tightened. Their father had built something special, something meant to last. Now, confined to a nursing home bed, he still believed his son was keeping the Cole legacy alive. Jackson couldn't bear to tell him that 4 of the 5 trucks had been sold off, that the company logo had been stripped from the last remaining rig, or that bankruptcy loomed like a storm cloud on the horizon. The truck's headlights caught a sign for an upcoming rest stop. Jackson needed coffee, the real kind, not the watered-down stuff from his thermos. 20 years ago, these stops were meeting places where independent drivers shared tips, stories, and warnings about bad brokers. Now they were just another reminder of a dying way of life. The lot would be full of corporate fleet trucks, their drivers more concerned with electronic logging devices than conversation. He thought about the box of old photos in his apartment, especially the one of him at 8 years old, proudly wearing his father's trucking cap. Back then, the open road meant freedom, possibility, the chance to see the country while making an honest living. Now it felt more like a trap, each mile taking him further from that bright-eyed kid's dreams. The rain started falling harder, fat drops hammering against the windshield. Jackson adjusted the wipers, squinting through the darkness. Another 12 hours to Denver, then a quick turnaround for a load heading east. If he could string together enough runs this month, maybe he could keep the bank at bay for a little longer. That's what his life had become, a series of maybes and if-onlys, held together by coffee, determination, and the occasional prayer. Still, there was something about the night roads that kept him going. Out here, between the cities and suburbs, you could still find moments of peace. No traffic, no paperwork, no bill collectors, just the steady rhythm of tires on asphalt and the promise of dawn somewhere ahead. These quiet hours reminded him why he'd chosen this life, even as the world seemed determined to make that choice impossible. The CB radio crackled with scattered chatter, weather reports, traffic warnings, the usual overnight small talk. Jackson reached for the mic, but stopped himself. What would he say? That he was watching his family's legacy crumble? That he was one bad month away from losing everything? That despite it all, he couldn't imagine doing anything else? Instead, he kept driving, letting the familiar weight of the steering wheel ground him. Tomorrow's problems would come soon enough. For now, there was just the road, the rain, and the fading dream of a third-generation trucker trying to hold onto a piece of American history that seemed to be slipping away with every passing mile. Katherine Morgan stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, watching the city lights flicker like stars beneath her. 60 stories up, the world looked different, cleaner, more orderly, almost perfect, but she knew better. The email notification chiming on her desk was yet another reminder that perfection was just an illusion sold to shareholders. Ms. Morgan, the board is requesting an emergency meeting. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Davidson says it's about the hostile takeover attempt. Katherine closed her eyes, feeling the familiar tension headache building. Tech giant corporation's latest move was aggressive. They'd been buying up shares through shell companies, preparing for a fight she'd seen coming for months. Aurora Technologies had been her life's work. She'd built it from a small software startup in her garage to a billion-dollar empire. But success had come with a price. Every decision was scrutinized, every move analyzed. The business papers called her the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley. Brilliant but ruthless, successful but alone. They didn't see the nights she spent poring over code, the weekends sacrificed, the relationships that withered under the weight of her ambition. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her mother. "Honey, you missed Sunday dinner again. The family misses you." Katherine's throat tightened. When was the last time she'd sat down for a real meal? Most nights, dinner was whatever her assistant ordered in, eaten while reviewing quarterly projections or acquisition proposals. The corner of her desk held a single framed photo, Katherine at her college graduation, standing between her parents. She was smiling then, genuine and unguarded. Before the IPO, before the endless board meetings, before she learned that trust was a luxury she couldn't afford in her position. Her father had passed away last year, and she'd attended the funeral via video call because of a crucial merger negotiation. "Your 3 o'clock is here," her assistant announced. Another venture capitalist, probably, with another proposal that would boost short-term profits at the expense of her company's soul. Katherine had fought hard to keep Aurora's focus on innovation rather than just the bottom line, but lately it felt like she was losing that battle. The latest financial report sat on her desk, each page filled with numbers that would impress Wall Street, but felt increasingly hollow. Aurora's latest product launch had been successful, their stock price was up, and their market share was growing. By every measurable metric, she was winning. So why did it feel like she was suffocating? Her gaze drifted to the small news article framed on her wall. "Local Girl Makes Good, How Katherine Morgan Revolutionized Tech." The article was 10 years old now, written when Aurora first went public. She remembered that girl, remembered her dreams of changing the world through technology. Somewhere along the way, those dreams had gotten buried under shareholder expectations and market pressures. The intercom buzzed again. "Ms. Morgan, legal needs your signature on the injunction against the leak." Another crisis, another fire to put out. Last week, a former employee had threatened to go public with allegations about toxic work culture. The PR team had contained it, but the incident left a bitter taste in her mouth. Was this what success was supposed to feel like? Katherine reached for her tablet, scrolling through the hundreds of unread emails. Meeting requests, partnership, proposals, charity galas wanting her appearance. Everyone wanted something from her, needed something from her. The world saw Katherine Morgan, CEO, but when was the last time anyone had seen just Katherine? Rain began falling outside her window, distorting the city lights into watery smears. Thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. Her weather app showed it moving east, along the same route she'd need to take to reach the Denver office for tomorrow's board meeting. A sudden thought struck her. What if she didn't go? What if, just for once, she stepped off the carefully constructed path she'd been following? The idea was absurd, irresponsible, and somehow for the first time in years she felt herself smile. Katherine reached for her phone, hesitated, then turned it off. She grabbed her emergency go-bag, the one she kept ready for sudden business, or trips, and her favorite worn leather jacket, the one her PR team hated because it didn't fit her polished image. "Cancel my appointments," she told her assistant. "Something's come up." Before anyone could stop her, she was in the private elevator, heading down to the parking garage. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her car keys, but her mind felt clearer than it had in months. Let them wonder where she was. Let them deal with the chaos for once. For the next few hours, or days, maybe, she wouldn't be Katherine Morgan, CEO of Aurora Technologies. She'd just be Katherine, a woman trying to remember who she was before the world started demanding she be someone else. The first sign that something was wrong came with a shudder. Katherine's luxury sedan, which had never given her trouble before, began making sounds she'd never heard from an engine. She'd been driving for hours, the rain getting heavier with each passing mile, when the car started losing power. Pulling onto the shoulder, she watched helplessly as white smoke billowed from under the hood. Perfect. Just perfect. Her first instinct was to reach for her phone, but she stopped herself. Turning it on meant being found, meant ending this brief taste of freedom before it had really begun. The nearest town was miles away, and the storm was getting worse. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the empty highway stretching endlessly in both directions. Thunder crashed overhead as she popped the hood, immediately regretting it as rain soaked through her jacket. Despite all her technical knowledge, car engines might as well have been alien technology. The roadside emergency kit in her trunk contained all the recommended items, but she had no idea how to use any of them. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing larger. Katherine's heart rate quickened. Out here, alone on a dark highway, she was just another stranded traveler, vulnerable, exposed. The vehicle slowed as it approached. A semi-truck, its massive frame dwarfing her sedan. Jackson Cole had seen enough broken-down vehicles in his years on the road to know this one wasn't going anywhere soon. He shouldn't stop. He was already behind schedule, and experience had taught him that good intentions often led to complications. But something made him ease off the accelerator. The truck's air brakes hissed as he pulled onto the shoulder, keeping a respectful distance. Through his side mirror, he watched the woman by the car tense up, clearly weighing her options. He'd seen enough fear in his life to recognize it, even at a distance. Katherine watched as the truck's door opened and a figure emerged. In the glare of headlights, she could make out a tall man in worn jeans and a faded plaid shirt, moving with the careful deliberation of someone trying not to appear threatening. "Engine trouble?" His voice carried easily over the rain, gentle despite its deep timbre. Up close, Katherine could see the lines around his eyes, laugh lines her mother would have called them, and the kind of weathered face that spoke of long hours under open skies. It just died. She gestured helplessly at the smoking engine. "I don't suppose you know anything about German engineering." Jackson approached the engine, squinting through the rain. "Enough to know this isn't something that's getting fixed on the side of the road." He glanced at her, taking in the expensive jacket that wasn't meant for weather like this. "Nearest mechanic's about 40 miles ahead. I could radio for a tow. But in this weather, you might be waiting hours." Katherine weighed her options. The rational choice would be to call her assistant, have a car sent, end this impromptu adventure. But rationality had gotten her into this mess in the first place, the carefully planned life that had somehow become a cage. I don't suppose. She hesitated, aware of how this would sound. I don't suppose you're heading east. I could pay for a ride. The words felt strange in her mouth. When was the last time she'd had to ask anyone for help? Jackson studied her for a long moment. Everything he knew about safety and common sense told him to call for that tow truck and move on. But there was something in her eyes, a mix of determination and desperation he recognized all too well. Ma'am, no offense, but hitching rides with strangers isn't exactly safe. He paused, seeing something flicker across her face. Then again, neither is standing out here in this storm. The rain was coming down harder now, drumming against the truck's metal roof. Katherine shivered, and Jackson made his decision. Look, I'm headed to Denver. I can drop you at a garage or hotel along the way, but I've got some ground rules. She nodded, relief washing over her. Of course. First, we stick to main roads, well-lit stops only. Second, you keep your phone on you. Third, he reached into his cab and pulled out a business card, handing it to her. Take a picture of my license and this card. Send it to someone you trust. That way, there's a record. Katherine stared at the card. Cole Transport Services, it read, with a Colorado business license number. The gesture surprised her. He was protecting her, but also himself. Smart. I'm Katherine, she offered, carefully omitting her last name. And I appreciate this more than you know. Jackson Cole. He helped her grab her bag from her car, then showed her to the passenger side of his truck. Sorry about the mess. Don't get many visitors up here. As Katherine climbed into the cab, she was struck by how different it felt from her usual transportation. The seat was worn but comfortable, with the lived-in feel of a well-used workspace. The dashboard was a complex array of gauges and switches, more complicated than she'd expected. Jackson settled into the driver's seat, the suspension creaking slightly under his weight. Might want to buckle up. Road gets a bit rough through the mountains. As they pulled away from her stranded car, Katherine felt a strange mix of anxiety and excitement. For the first time in years, she had no idea what would happen next. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt something else. Freedom. The truck's headlights cut through the rain, illuminating the road ahead. Neither of them knew it yet, but this night would change both their lives forever. Sometimes the greatest journeys start with a breakdown on a stormy highway, and sometimes the most important connections are made when we're lost. The windshield wipers kept steady time as miles of wet asphalt disappeared beneath the truck's massive wheels. Katherine found herself mesmerized by their rhythm, by the hypnotic dance of raindrops in the headlights. The cab's interior was surprisingly cozy, with its soft amber glow from the dashboard and the gentle rumble of the engine beneath them. So, Jackson broke the comfortable silence. What brings someone like you out here on a night like this? There was no judgment in his voice, just genuine curiosity. Katherine considered her answer carefully. Would you believe I'm running away? The truth slipped out before she could stop it, surprising them both. Jackson's laugh was warm, unexpected. From what I've seen, people usually run toward something, not just away. He adjusted the wipers as the rain intensified. The trick is figuring out which one you're doing. Maybe both, she admitted, watching lightning illuminate distant clouds. Have you ever felt like you're living someone else's life? Like somewhere along the way, you took a wrong turn and ended up in a story that wasn't meant to be yours. The question hung in the air between them. Jackson's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. My whole family was truckers, 3 generations. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a mechanic instead. Open my own shop, build custom bikes. He shook his head, smiling ruefully. Life had other plans. Do you regret it? Katherine asked, genuinely curious. Following the family path instead of your own? Some days. His honesty caught her off guard. But there's something about this life that gets in your blood. The freedom of it, maybe. Or the solitude. Out here you can think clearly, you know. Katherine. Did know. For the first time in months, her mind wasn't racing with meetings, deadlines, and market projections. "It's peaceful," she said softly. "I didn't expect that." They passed a sign for a small town, its lights a dim glow on the horizon. Jackson glanced at his fuel gauge. "We've got a few hours before we need to stop, unless you're hungry." "I'm good." She surprised herself by meaning it. Usually she was always checking the time, planning the next move. Tonight she was content to just be. "You know what I love about night driving?" Jackson gestured at the world beyond their windshield. "Everyone out here has a story. That car that just passed? Could be someone heading to a new job, or going home to family, or starting over somewhere new. Out here we're all just travelers passing in the night." Katherine smiled at the poetry in his words. "What's my story then? What do you see when you look at me?" Jackson considered this, taking his time. Someone successful, educated, used to being in control, but tonight, he glanced at her, tonight you're letting go of something. Am I close? She felt exposed, seen in a way that boardroom power plays and media scrutiny had never managed. Uncomfortably so, she admitted. "Don't worry," he grinned. "Your secrets are safe with me and the highway." His easy acceptance was refreshing. No agenda, no angle to work. The conversation drifted to lighter topics. Jackson told her about the strangest cargo he'd ever hauled, a truck full of rubber ducks, and she shared stories about her college days, carefully editing out details that might reveal her identity. There was something freeing about talking to someone who had no preconceptions about who she was or what she should be. Rain continued to fall, but softer now, more like music than storm. Katherine found herself fighting sleep, lulled by the truck's motion and Jackson's steady presence. When was the last time she'd felt this peaceful? "Get some rest if you need it," Jackson offered, noticing her drowsy state. "I'll wake you when we stop for fuel." "I shouldn't." She started to protest, but exhaustion was winning. "Trust me." His voice was gentle. "Out here, sometimes the best thing you can do is close your eyes and let the road carry you for a while." As Katherine drifted off, she realized that for the first time in years, she felt safe enough to let her guard down completely. In the morning, she would probably regret this impulsive decision, but right now, watching the world pass by through half-closed eyes, she couldn't bring herself to care. Jackson glanced at his sleeping passenger, wondering about the story behind her carefully maintained facade. There was something both strong and vulnerable about her, like steel wrapped in silk. He turned the heat up slightly, noticing she'd shivered in her sleep, and returned his attention to the road ahead. The night stretched out before them, full of possibilities neither could have imagined when the sun went down. Sometimes the greatest adventures start with the smallest decisions, like stopping to help a stranded traveler on a rainy night. The Big Rig Diner's neon sign cut through the misty rain, its red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement. Jackson pulled into the truck stop with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it thousands of times before. The lot was half full. Other drivers seeking refuge from the storm or catching mandatory rest hours. "Best coffee between Chicago and Denver," Jackson announced as they hurried through the rain. "And Marie makes pie that'll make you forget all your troubles, at least until the plate's empty." Katherine followed him into the diner, taking in the worn vinyl booths, the counter with its row of chrome-edged stools, the sound of coffee cups clinking against saucers. The air smelled of bacon and coffee and something sweet baking. It was so far removed from her usual dining experiences that it felt almost like stepping into another world. Jackson Cole, a waitress with silver-streaked hair and laugh lines, called out, "Thought that was your rig pulling in. Your usual?" She turned to Katherine with a warm smile. "And for your friend." "I'm Marie," she added. "And don't let this one fool you. He's got a sweet tooth that'd shame a kindergartner." Jackson rubbed his neck, looking sheepish. "Marie's been feeding me pie and giving me grief for about 10 years now. Someone's got to keep you boys honest." Marie winked. "Now, honey, what can I get you?" Katherine realized she hadn't even looked at a menu. "What would you recommend?" At this hour, the meatloaf's always good, But the chicken fried steak is what keeps the truckers coming back. And the apple pie just came out of the oven. Chicken fried steak, then, Katherine decided, surprising herself. When was the last time she'd eaten something that wasn't carefully portioned and nutritionally optimized? Marie nodded approvingly. Good choice. Coffee, please. As Marie walked away, Katherine noticed Jackson watching her with amusement. What? Nothing. He smiled. Just trying to picture you in your normal life. Something tells me this isn't your usual style. Is it that obvious? She looked down at her designer clothes, now slightly rumpled from the rain and travel. Let's just say you don't. Look like our typical midnight crowd. His tone was teasing but kind. But you seem more relaxed here than when I first picked you up. He was right, she realized. The tension that had been her constant companion for years had eased somewhat. Maybe it was the lack of people watching her every move, analyzing her every decision. Here, she was just another traveler seeking shelter from the storm. Marie returned with their coffee. Katherine wrapped her hands around the warm mug, breathing in the rich aroma. It wasn't the artisanal blend she was used to, but somehow it smelled better than any coffee she'd had in recent memory. So, you mentioned family earlier, she ventured. Are you close with them? A shadow crossed Jackson's face. My sister Linda, yeah. She helps with the business paperwork when she can. Dad's in a home now. Dementia. He has good days and bad. Days. Mom passed when I was in high school. I'm sorry, Katherine said softly, meaning it. In her world, family often meant board seats and inheritance disputes. This was different, raw, more real. Life happens, he shrugged. But she could see the pain beneath his casual response. What about you? Got family waiting somewhere? Katherine thought about her mother's unanswered messages, her empty apartment. It's complicated, she admitted. We're not close anymore. Success has a way of changing relationships. Their food arrived before Jackson could respond, generous portions on heavy ceramic plates. Katherine cut into her chicken fried steak, surprised by how good it smelled. The first bite was a revelation. Good, right? Jackson grinned at her expression. Marie's got magic in her kitchen. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The diner's ambient sounds washing over them, other drivers talking in low voices, the clink of silverware, the hiss of the grill in the kitchen. Katherine found herself studying the other patrons, wondering about their stories, their destinations. You're doing it again, Jackson observed. What? Thinking too hard. Sometimes a diner's just a diner and dinner's just dinner, she laughed, surprised by how natural it felt. Is that your philosophy of life? Keep it simple. More like, appreciate what's in front of you. He gestured at their plates. The diner. The rain-streaked windows. Sometimes the best moments are the ones you never planned for. As if to prove his point, Marie appeared with 2 slices of apple pie, steam still rising from the golden crust. On the house, she announced. Any friend of Jackson's family here. Katherine took a bite of the pie, letting the warm, spiced sweetness fill her mouth. For just a moment, she wasn't Katherine Morgan, CEO of Aurora Technologies. She was just Katherine, sharing pie with a kind stranger in a truck-stop diner while rain fell outside. And somehow, that felt more real than anything she'd experienced in years. The first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky in soft purples and pinks, the storm finally clearing to reveal stars fading into morning light. They'd been driving for hours since leaving the diner, sharing comfortable silences and bits of conversation that grew deeper as the night wore on. You never really answered my question, Katherine said, watching the colors change in the sky. About regrets, following the family business instead of your dreams. Jackson's hands flexed on the steering. A wheel. Thought I did. You deflected. Skillfully, I might add. She smiled, but you didn't answer. He was quiet for a long moment, considering. You know what the hardest part is? Not the long hours or the bills or the loneliness. It's knowing that everything my grandfather and father built is slipping away, and there's nothing I can do about it. Katherine felt her chest tighten. How many times had she sat in board meetings making decisions that affected family businesses just like his? "The industry's changing," she said softly. "Everything's changing. Big companies, automation, rising costs." His voice held no bitterness, just resignation. "Dad used to say a man's word and a hard day's work were all you needed to succeed. World's not that simple anymore." Her phone buzzed in her bag. She'd turned it on briefly at the diner to let her assistant know she was safe, only to find dozens of missed calls and messages. Now she ignored it, focusing instead on Jackson's profile in the growing light. "What would you do?" she asked. "If you could do anything, start over fresh, what would you choose?" "Still have that dream about the mechanic shop," he admitted. "But not just repairs. Custom work, rebuilding classics, teaching young folks the trade. Dad always said I had a gift for seeing how things fit together, how to fix what's broken." He shook his head. "Pretty foolish at my age, I guess." "Why foolish?" "Dreams don't come with expiration dates." A small smile touched his lips. "You sound like Linda. She's always pushing me to take chances, make changes. Hard to do when you're carrying 3 generations of expectations." Catherine's phone buzzed again. This time, Jackson noticed. "Someone's trying awful hard to reach you." "Work," she said, not entirely lying. "I needed some space to think. Must be important work. It used to feel important. Lately it just feels—" She searched for the right word. "Empty." Jackson glanced at her. "What would you do if you could start over?" The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on building Aurora, on proving herself, on meeting everyone's expectations, she'd forgotten how to want things for herself. "I used to code," she said finally. "Back when I first started, my company." She caught herself, but Jackson didn't seem to notice the slip. "Just me and my computer, creating something from nothing. It felt like magic. Now I spend all my time in meetings, talking about coding instead of doing it. Sometimes I wonder if I've lost touch with what made me fall in love with technology in the first place." "Sounds lonely at the top." "It is." The admission surprised her with its honesty. "Everyone wants something from you. Every relationship feels transactional, except this one," Jackson said quietly. Their eyes met briefly before he returned his attention to the road. Something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the strange intimacy they'd found in these shared hours. The sun was rising properly now, painting the clouds in gold and rose. Catherine's phone buzzed once more, then fell silent. In the growing light, she could see Jackson more clearly. The strength in his hands, the kindness in his face, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. "Tell me about your best day," she said suddenly. "Not the most important or successful, just the happiest you can remember." Jackson's face softened at the memory. "Summer, about 20 years ago. Dad let me drive the truck for the first time. Just around the yard, but still. Mom made lemonade. Linda was taking pictures. Dad had this proud look." He trailed off, lost in the moment. "Simple thing, really, but perfect." "Simple isn't bad," Katherine said, thinking of her own life, with its endless complications. "Your turn," he prompted. "Best day." She thought about it. Not the IPO day or the first $1 million contract or any of the achievements that filled her resume. College. My roommate and I stayed up all night debugging this program we'd written. Just us, endless coffee, and this problem we had to solve. When we finally figured it out, the sun was coming up just like now. We were exhausted and punchy and so proud of ourselves. She smiled at the memory. "We went for pancakes after, still in our pajamas." "Sounds perfect," Jackson said softly. It was. Katherine watched the sunrise paint the world in new colors. "Sometimes I wonder when I stopped doing things just because they made me happy." "Maybe that's what you're really running toward," Jackson suggested. "Not away from your life, but back to yourself." The truth of his words settled over her like the morning light. How had this stranger on a dark highway seen so clearly what she'd been missing? As if reading her thoughts, Jackson added, "Sometimes it takes getting lost to find your way back home." The morning sun had burned away the last traces of storm clouds when Catherine's phone began ringing again. This time, the caller ID made her breath catch. Thomas Davidson, head of the board. She silenced it, but not before Jackson noticed. "Attention. Bad news?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "Just complications." She scrolled through her messages, each one more urgent than the last. Tech giant's hostile takeover bid had gone public. The stock was volatile. The media was having a field day with her absence. "Where is Aurora's CEO?" screamed one headline. No," Jackson said carefully. "Whatever you're running from, it usually catches up eventually." Catherine's laugh held no humor. "Trust me, I'm well aware." She looked out the window, watching farmland roll past. "I just needed to breathe, to think clearly without everyone watching, waiting for me to make a mistake." A news alert flashed across her screen, her own face staring back at her from a financial news website. She quickly turned the phone face down, but her heart was racing. How long before someone recognized her? Before her carefully constructed moment of freedom came crashing down? "Must be important," Jackson observed, "if it's got you looking like you've seen a ghost." "It's—" she started, then stopped. How could she explain without revealing everything? "It's complicated. Life usually is." He adjusted the truck's speed as they approached a construction zone. "My dad used to say that running from a problem is like trying to outrun your shadow. The faster you go, the harder it chases you." The CB radio crackled to life with chatter about road conditions ahead. Katherine used the interruption to check her emails again. Her assistant had marked 3 as urgent. Board emergency meeting called for 3 p.m. Tech giant CEO making public statements about leadership vacuum. PR team needs statement ASAP. She felt the walls closing in, her brief taste of freedom souring. The real world was demanding her return, and she knew she couldn't hide forever. Jackson's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "You know what else Dad used to say? Sometimes you need to step back from a problem to see the solution clearly." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He had his moments." Jackson smiled. "Before the dementia took hold, he could size up any situation and find the path through it. Taught me that most problems aren't as complicated as we make them." Catherine's phone buzzed with another call, her mother this time. She let it go to voicemail, guilt gnawing at her. "What if the problem is you?" she asked softly. "What if you've become so tangled up in who everyone needs you to be that you've lost sight of who you are?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, considering. "Then maybe getting lost for a while isn't running away. Maybe it's finding your way back." A text message popped up. "Katherine, the vultures are circling. We need you." Thomas's. She felt tears threatening and blinked them back. When had she last cried? The Katherine Morgan that the world knew never showed weakness, never let emotion cloud her judgment. But here, in this truck with this kind stranger, she felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. "Pull over," she said suddenly. "Everything okay?" "Please, I need a minute." Jackson guided the truck onto the shoulder. The moment they stopped, Katherine was out the door, gulping in the fresh morning air. She walked a few steps away, aware of Jackson watching her with concern. The countryside stretched out around them, peaceful and indifferent to corporate takeovers and stock prices. Her phone rang again, another board member. She stared at it, feeling the weight of expectations, responsibilities, and consequences. "Whatever it is," Jackson's voice came from behind her, gentle and steady. "You don't have to face it alone." Katherine turned to look at him, this man who had shown her more genuine kindness in one night than she'd experienced in years of corporate success. How could she tell him that she was the very thing he was fighting against? The face of big business crushing small operators like himself? "I'm not," she started, then stopped. "I'm not who you think I am." "Maybe you're exactly who you need to be right now," he replied, "even if you don't know it yet." Back on the road, Jackson seemed to sense Katherine's need for distraction. He began pointing out landmarks, sharing stories accumulated over decades of driving these routes. Each tale revealed more about the man behind the wheel, and Katherine found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet wisdom. See that old barn there? He nodded toward a weathered structure leaning against the morning sky. Been watching it slowly collapse for 15 years. Used to be bright red, proud-looking thing. Family farm, probably. Now it's just another ghost of what used to be. Katherine watched the barn disappear in the side mirror. Everything changes, doesn't it? Not everything. Jackson patted the dashboard affectionately. Some things are worth holding on to. Dad taught me every inch of this engine. Said understanding how things work is the first step to keeping them running. Her phone vibrated again, this time with a news alert. The stock had dropped another 5 points. She quickly darkened the screen, but not before catching sight of another headline about her absence. You know, Jackson continued, seemingly oblivious to her distress, trucking's not just about driving. It's about reading the road, the weather, other drivers. It's about knowing when to push through and when to wait out a storm. The metaphor wasn't lost on Katherine. She thought about the corporate storm brewing, about tech giants' aggressive moves, about her board's panic. What if waiting isn't an option? There's always a choice. Might not be an easy one, but it's there. He adjusted the mirrors, a habit she'd noticed he had when thinking. Had a load of medical supplies once, deadlines so tight it seemed impossible. Storm coming in, roads getting dangerous. Most would have tried to push through. What did you do? Pulled over. Called dispatch. Told them I needed 6 hours. They weren't happy, but better to deliver late than not at all. His eyes crinkled with a smile. Sometimes the brave choice looks like cowardice to people who don't understand the road. Katherine felt something warm brush her hand and looked down to find Jackson's coffee thermos rolling across the seat. Without thinking, she caught it, her fingers briefly touching his as she handed it back. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her. Their eyes met briefly, and Katherine saw something there that made her heart skip. Then Jackson cleared his throat and returned his attention to the road, but the moment lingered between them. Tell me more about your father, she said softly, wanting to keep this connection, to stay in this space where titles and bank accounts didn't matter. Stubborn as they come. Proud, too. Jackson's voice held equal measures of love and pain. Hardest thing I ever did was taking over when his mind started slipping. He'd forget where he was, try to make deliveries that didn't exist. The day I had to sell the first truck. He trailed off, shaking his head. You did what you had to do, did I? Sometimes I wonder if I could have found another way. Taken out. Loans, worked harder, something. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. Now the bank's breathing down my neck, and I'm one bad month away from losing everything he built. Katherine felt the weight of her power then, the casual ease with which she could solve his problems. One phone call, one transfer of funds, and coal transport services could be saved. But that would mean revealing who she was, shattering this precious bubble of authenticity they'd created. Her phone buzzed yet again. This time Jackson's eyes lingered on it. Must be some storm you're avoiding. Something like that. She tried to smile, but it felt brittle. Maybe I'm just a coward, running away instead of facing it. Nah. His certainty surprised her. Seen. Enough cowards in my time. They don't have your eyes. My eyes? Yeah. He glanced at her again, something soft in his expression. They're fighter's eyes. Whatever you're dealing with, running ain't your style. You're just regrouping. The simple faith in his words made her throat tight. When was the last time someone had seen her, really seen her, instead of her position or her wealth? The morning sun streamed through the windshield, warming her face. Ahead, the highway stretched endlessly, promising both escape and return. Katherine found herself wishing they could just keep driving, leaving behind board meetings and hostile takeovers and all the complex webs of corporate life. But she knew better. Soon, reality would catch up. Soon, Jackson would learn who she really was. And then everything would change. The late morning sun cast long shadows across the highway as Katherine's phone lit up with another series of messages. Each one felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, the guilt of her deception growing heavier with every passing mile. You should probably answer at least one of those, Jackson said gently, Someone's bound to be worried. She nodded, picking up the phone. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. But it was her mother's latest text that made her pause. "Katie, whatever's wrong, we can fix it together. Just let me know you're safe." Drawing a shaky breath, Katherine typed a quick response. "I'm safe. Need time to think, trust me." She hit send before she could change her mind. "Family?" Jackson asked, noting her expression. "My mother. She worries." Katherine stared out the window, watching farmland give way to the first signs of suburban sprawl. "I've never done anything like this before, just disappeared." "First time for everything," he smiled, but his eyes held concern. "Though something tells me this isn't just about family." A news alert flashed across her phone, another story about her absence, this time speculating about her mental health. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd never felt more clear-headed than during these hours on the road. "Can I ask you something?" She turned to face him. "How do you know when you're doing the right thing? When everyone around you sees it differently?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, considering. "Had a choice once," he finally said. "Big shipping company offered to buy us out. Good money. Enough to pay off Dad's medical bills, set up something. New. But it would have meant laying off drivers who'd been with us for decades. Family friends, people who trusted us. What did you do? Turn them down? Everyone said I was crazy. Maybe I was." He shrugged. "But I could still look those drivers in the eye. Some things are worth more than money." The words hit Katherine like a physical blow. How many times had she been on the other side of that equation? How many family businesses had she consolidated, streamlined, optimized out of existence? "What if," she started, then paused, choosing her words carefully. "What if you're on both sides? What if every choice hurts someone? Then you choose the path you can live with." His simple answer carried the weight of experience, not the easiest one, or the most profitable, the one that lets you sleep at night. Katherine's phone buzzed again. A message from her assistant, marked urgent. "Tech giant CEO making announcement at 2 p.m. Board expects counter-strategy. Please respond." She felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. The corporate warrior in her knew exactly what needed to be done. Aggressive defense strategy, calculated public statements, strategic stock movements. But sitting here, watching Jackson's steady hands on the wheel, those solutions felt hollow. "You know what's strange?" she said softly. "I've spent years in boardrooms, making decisions that affected thousands of lives, but I've never felt more real than these past few hours in your truck." Jackson glanced at her, something warm in his expression. "Maybe that's your answer right there." Their eyes met, and for a moment, Katherine felt the world narrow to just this: the quiet cab of a truck, the open road, and a connection she hadn't been looking for but now couldn't imagine losing. The moment was broken by a news alert blaring from a passing car's radio. Continuing coverage of the Aurora Technologies crisis as CEO Katherine Morgan's unexplained absence. Katherine's heart stopped. Jackson's hands tightened on the wheel, but he gave no other sign of having heard. She watched his profile, intently, searching for any indication that he'd made the connection. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the steady hum of tires on asphalt. Katherine found herself holding her breath, caught between the urge to confess everything and the desperate desire to preserve these last precious moments of being just Katherine, a woman who'd found something genuine in the most unexpected place. "Complicated life you've got there," Jackson finally said, his voice carefully neutral. "Jackson, Not yet," he cut her off gently. "Whatever you're about to say, just not yet." Sometimes the truth needs its own timing, but they both knew time was running out. Denver was getting closer, and with it, the end of this brief escape from reality. Soon, Katherine would have to choose between the life she'd built and the truth she'd discovered on this long night's journey. For now, though, they drove on in silence, each lost in thoughts of what was coming and what would be lost when it did. They were an hour outside of Denver when everything fell apart. The truck stop television was tuned to a financial news channel, and Catherine's face filled the screen the moment they walked in. There was no hiding from it this time, no way to pretend she hadn't heard the reporter's urgent tone. Aurora Technologies CEO Katherine Morgan remains unreachable as the company faces its biggest crisis in years. Sources say the board is considering emergency measures in light of her unexpected absence. Jackson stopped mid-step, his coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. Katherine watched as recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by confusion, then something that looked painfully like betrayal. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. "Katherine Morgan," he said finally, her name sounding foreign on his lips. "CEO of Aurora Technologies. Worth what? 2 billion? 3? "Jackson, please let me explain." "Explain what?" His voice was quiet, controlled, but she could hear the hurt beneath it. "How you sat there listening to me pour out my heart about losing my family's business. How you nodded along while I talked about corporate vultures picking apart everything. My father built—" Other travelers were starting to stare. Katherine could feel their phones coming out, cameras pointing her way. After hours of blessed anonymity, her public life was crashing back in spectacular fashion. "Not here," she pleaded. "Can we talk somewhere?" "Private," Jackson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Private, right. Because that's worked out so well so far." But he followed her outside anyway, back to the truck that had been their shared sanctuary through the night. Once inside the cab, Katherine turned to face him. "Everything I told you was true, about feeling lost, about needing to find myself. Again, about—" she hesitated, "about how real this felt. Real." Jackson's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "You want to talk about real? I'll tell you about real. Real is watching everything you've worked for slip away because companies like yours decide we're not efficient enough, not profitable enough. Real is telling my father his life's work is worthless in the modern economy. Real is—" his voice broke slightly. "Real is thinking I'd finally met someone who understood. I do understand." The words burst from her before she could stop them. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. These hours with you, they've changed how I see everything. Changed how you see what? Me? The quaint little trucking industry? Are we an entertaining diversion from your corporate responsibilities? That's not fair." "Fair?" Now anger crept into his voice. "You want to talk about fair? How about lying to someone who opened their life to you? How about pretending to be just another traveler while your company probably has a dozen small operators? Like me in their takeover sites right now?" Katherine felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but made no move to wipe them away. "I never meant to hurt you. I just, for the first time in years, someone was seeing me, not my position or my wealth. Just me." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the parking lot where trucks came and went, drivers living the life he'd grown up believing in. "You know what the worst part is?" he finally said. "I think I understand why you did it. Doesn't make it right, but I understand." "What can I do?" she whispered. "Tell me how to fix this." "Fix this?" He turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. "There's nothing to fix, Katherine. Or should I call you Ms. Morgan? We're from different worlds. I knew that from the start. I just didn't know how different." Her phone rang. Thomas Davidson again. The real world was calling, demanding her return. But all she could think about was the way Jackson had looked at her before he knew who she was. The genuine connection they'd shared through the night. "I have to get to Denver," he said flatly. "Board meeting waiting for you, I assume." "Jackson, don't." He held up a hand. "Just don't. We've got another hour's drive. Let's just get there and go our separate ways, back to our real lives." The words hit her like physical blows. Real lives. As if what they'd shared wasn't real. As if the understanding and connection they'd found was somehow invalidated by her title, her wealth, her hidden identity. They pulled back onto the highway in silence, the easy companionship of the night replaced by an almost tangible barrier. Katherine watched Jackson's profile, seeing the muscle working in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the wheel too tightly. She wanted to tell him that this was her real life too, that the woman he'd talked with through the night wasn't a lie. But she knew any words would just sound like excuses now. So they drove on, the miles rolling away beneath them, each lost in thoughts of what might have been and what could never be. The morning's hope had given way to afternoon's harsh reality, and there was no going back. The Denver skyline appeared on the horizon, glass towers reaching toward the afternoon sun. For Katherine, each mile closer felt like another step back into a life that suddenly seemed foreign. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing. The board meeting had been moved up. Reporters were camped outside Aurora's offices, and tech giant's CEO was about to make his announcement. Jackson drove with mechanical precision, his face set in lines she couldn't read. Gone was the easy smile, the gentle wisdom that had guided their night-long conversation. In its place was a mask of professional detachment that hurt more than anger would have. "Take the next exit," she said softly. "The Aurora building is downtown." He nodded without speaking, smoothly changing lanes. A news helicopter circled overhead, and Katherine wondered if they were looking for her. The thought almost made her laugh. Here she was, the missing CEO everyone was searching for, riding in a weathered semi-truck driven by a man who could barely stand to look at her. "Your board's probably worried," Jackson finally said. A voice carefully neutral. "They're worried about the company, not me." The truth of it hit her anew. That's all anyone's worried about. Stock prices, market share, quarterly projections. Must be nice having such simple problems. The bitterness in his voice was sharp enough to cut. Katherine turned to face him. "You think my problems are simple? You think I don't lie awake at night thinking about the people affected by my decisions, the families, the communities? Do you?" His question hung in the air between them. "Or do they just become numbers in a spreadsheet after a while?" Before she could answer, her phone rang again. This time the caller ID made her sit up straighter. Tech giant CEO himself. Jackson noticed her reaction. "Duty calls?" The words could have been mocking, but instead they just sounded tired. Katherine stared at the phone, remembering their conversation about choices and paths you could live with. "No," she said, silencing the call. Not yet. They were in the city, proper now, navigating through streets increasingly clogged with traffic. The Aurora Technologies building loomed ahead, its sleek glass exterior reflecting the clouds above. News vans clustered around the entrance like vultures. "You can drop me a block away," Katherine said. "No need to get caught up in all that." She gestured at the media circus. Jackson pulled the truck into a quiet side street, out of sight of the cameras. The engine's rumble faded to silence, leaving them in a bubble of stillness that felt like the eye of a storm. "So this is it," he said, still looking straight ahead. "Back to our separate worlds." "It doesn't have to be." The words surprised them both. "Jackson, what if?" "Don't." His voice was gentle but firm. "Don't make promises you can't keep. You have your responsibilities. I have mine. And what if those responsibilities are wrong? What if everything I thought was important isn't?" She was aware she sounded desperate but couldn't stop. "These hours with you, they've shown you a fantasy," he cut in. "A nice break from reality, but that's all it was." "You don't believe that. I know you felt it too, how real this was." Jackson finally turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes matched her own. Maybe that's the problem. It was too real, and now reality's calling. As if to prove his point, her phone lit up with another urgent message. The board was waiting. Decisions needed to be made. An empire needed its queen. Katherine reached for the door handle, then hesitated. "Thank you," she said softly, "for showing me what I've been missing, for reminding me who I used to be." "Katherine," Jackson's voice stopped her. "Whatever you decide in there, remember what we talked about choosing the path you can live with." She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Then she was out of the truck, her heels clicking on pavement that felt less solid than it should. Behind her, the truck's engine rumbled to life, and she forced herself not to look back as Jackson pulled away. The noise of the city rushed in to fill the space where their quiet conversation had been. Ahead lay her building, her life. her responsibilities. But for the first time in years, Katherine Morgan wasn't sure which path she could live with. The Aurora Technologies lobby fell silent as Katherine strode through the doors. Gone were her rain-dampened clothes from the night before, replaced by an outfit kept ready in her private office. But she felt different inside the familiar armor of her corporate attire, changed in ways her tailored suit couldn't hide. "Miss Morgan!" Thomas Davidson hurried toward her, tablet in hand. "The board is assembled. Tech Giant's CEO is about to make his announcement, and our stock has dropped. 12 points since opening." "What's their play?" Katherine asked, stepping into the elevator. "Hostile takeover, full acquisition. They're painting your absence as a leadership crisis." He glanced at her nervously. "Where were you?" Katherine watched the floor numbers climb. Getting perspective. The boardroom doors opened to a sea of anxious faces. Screens along the wall displayed financial data, news coverage, and a live feed of Tech Giant's headquarters where their CEO was preparing to speak. Katherine, Gerald, Myers, her longest-serving board member, stepped forward. "We've prepared a standard response package. Stock buyback, poison pill provisions, the usual defensive measures." She moved to the window, looking down at the city streets below. Somewhere out there, a truck was making its way through traffic, carrying a man who'd shown her more truth in one night than she'd found in years of corporate success. "Ms. Morgan," Thomas prompted, "we need your decision." The screens flickered as Tech Giant's CEO appeared at his podium. "Today, we're announcing our intention to acquire Aurora Technologies. This move will protect shareholder value and ensure stable leadership." Katherine turned from the window, her mind suddenly clear. "Pull up our latest market analysis. Focus on independent transportation sectors." Her team exchanged confused looks but complied. Data filled the screens. Statistics about small shipping companies, independent operators, family businesses struggling against corporate consolidation. "Katherine," Gerald said carefully, "this isn't the time for market research. We need to respond to the takeover threat." "No." She moved to the conference table, her heels clicking on marble. "This is exactly the time. While I was away, I saw something we've been missing. We've been so focused on expansion, on acquisition, that we've forgotten why I started this company. To create value for shareholders," Thomas interjected. "To solve problems, to make things better, not just bigger." She gestured at the market data. "Look at these numbers, small operators being squeezed out, family businesses failing, entire communities affected. We're part of that problem." The board stirred uncomfortably. On the screens, Tech Giant's CEO continued his carefully scripted speech about synergy and market optimization. "What are you suggesting?" Gerald asked. Katherine took a deep breath. "A complete restructuring of our acquisition strategy. Instead of absorbing small operators, we partner with them, provide technology, support, resources, but let them maintain their independence." "That's," Thomas sputtered, "that's not how this industry works." "Then we change the industry." Katherine's voice carried the strength of conviction. "Starting now." The boardroom erupted in protests, but Katherine held up her hand. "I've spent the last 12 hours seeing our impact through the eyes of the people we affect. It's time we became part of the solution." She could see the resistance in their faces, the ingrained habits of corporate thinking, but she also saw something else. A glimmer of recognition, perhaps, that business as usual wasn't sustainable. "And Tech Giant?" Gerald pressed. "Their offer will appeal to shareholders." Katherine smiled, thinking of Jackson's words about choosing paths you could live with. "Let me worry about Tech Giant. First, we have a company to reinvent." Jackson sat in his parked truck outside Denver's truck stop, staring at the news on his phone. The business channels were buzzing with speculation about Katherine Morgan's unexpected return and Aurora Technologies' puzzling new direction. Rumors of a radical restructuring plan had sent shockwaves through the industry. Aurora CEO challenges corporate status quo, read one headline. Morgan proposes revolutionary partnership model with independent operators. His thumb hovered over the delete button, ready to erase the news alerts he'd set up about her. He should drive away, forget the night that had felt so real, return to his struggling business, and a knock on his truck's door startled him. He looked down to see Katherine standing there, not in corporate armor this time, but in the same casual clothes she'd worn during their journey. Her expression was a mix of determination and vulnerability that made his heart twist. 5 minutes, she called up to him. That's all I'm asking. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't, but his hand was already reaching for the door handle. They sat at a quiet booth in the truck stop diner, an echo of their earlier meal that felt like a lifetime ago. Katherine pushed a folder across the table. Before you say anything, she began, I want you to read this. It's our new initiative. We're calling it the Independent Partnership Program. Jackson opened the folder reluctantly. Inside was a detailed proposal for a revolutionary business model, technology sharing, resource pooling, modernization support, all while leaving ownership and operational control in the hands of independent operators. You're changing your whole company because of one night? His voice was skeptical, but something else crept in. Hope, maybe. No. Katherine leaned forward. I'm changing it because you reminded me why I started it in the first place. To solve problems, to make things better. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. Pretty words, Katherine, but the real world is exactly what I'm talking about. She tapped the folder. This isn't charity or guilt, it's good business. Small operators like you understand this industry in ways corporate boards never will. We need that knowledge, that experience. We need partners, not acquisitions. Jackson studied her face, looking for any sign of manipulation or corporate maneuvering. He found only sincerity and something else. The same connection that had grown between them on the dark highway. And what does your board think about this revolutionary new direction? She smiled slightly, adjusting. But the numbers support it. Sustainable growth, reduced opposition, positive PR. Even they can't argue with that. The diner's coffee pot gurgled in the background, a familiar sound in an increasingly unfamiliar situation. Jackson looked down at the proposal again, seeing his father's dreams of independence reflected in its pages. Why me? He finally asked. Why come back? Katherine's hand moved across the table, stopping just short of touching his. Because some things are worth more than money. Some connections are worth fighting for. The morning sun streamed through the diner's windows, casting both their worlds in a new light. And in that light, the distance between CEO and truck driver, between corporate towers and open highways, didn't seem quite so vast after all. The Aurora Technologies boardroom had never seen anyone quite like Jackson Cole. He stood at the head of the glossy conference table in his cleanest plaid shirt and jeans, his weathered hands resting on a stack of documents Katherine had prepared. Around him, board members in expensive suits shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. Mr. Cole, Thomas Davidson's voice dripped with barely concealed disdain. While we appreciate you taking the time to join us, I'm not sure you fully grasp the complexities of corporate strategy. Actually, Jackson's calm voice filled the room. I understand them better than you might think. See, while you're looking at spreadsheets, I'm looking at real people, real businesses, real lives. Katherine stood beside him, watching her board's reactions. She'd warned Jackson this wouldn't be easy, but seeing him here, standing his ground against years of entrenched corporate thinking, made her heart swell with pride. The numbers don't lie, Gerald Myers interjected, pointing to the financial projections on the screen. Our traditional acquisition strategy has proven to be short-sighted, Katherine cut in. Jackson, show them what you showed me. Jackson opened his laptop, borrowed from Katherine, and pulled up a different set of numbers. These are the hidden costs you're not seeing. Community impact, job losses, innovation stifled by corporate standardization. But more importantly, his fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up a new spreadsheet. These are the potential gains from partnership versus acquisition. The board leaned forward despite themselves. Jackson's analysis was thorough, combining his ground-level industry knowledge with Katherine's corporate expertise. It painted a compelling picture of a new way forward. "This is all very idealistic," Thomas said, but Katherine could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "It's practical," Jackson corrected. "You want to know why small operators fight corporate buyouts so hard? Because we see what happens after. Quality drops, service becomes impersonal. Everything that made these businesses successful gets stripped away in the name of standardization. But with our partnership model," Katherine stepped forward, "we maintain what works while providing resources to modernize and compete. It's not just about preserving the past, it's about building a sustainable future." A murmur ran through the board members. On the screens behind them, tech giants' latest hostile takeover statements scrolled past, but they seemed less threatening now, less inevitable. "And you're willing to be our test case?" Gerald asked Jackson. "To prove this model can work?" Jackson met Katherine's eyes briefly before answering. "Coal Transport Services has been independent for 3 generations. We'd like to keep it that way, but a partnership that respects that independence, that builds something better together." "Yeah, I'm willing to try." The mood in the room shifted subtly. Board members began asking detailed questions, engaging with the idea rather than dismissing it. Katherine watched as Jackson answered each query with the same straight-talking wisdom that had first opened her eyes on that stormy night. By the time the meeting ended, even Thomas Davidson was grudgingly admitting the plan had merit. As the board filed out, Katherine overheard snippets of conversation about innovative approach and market differentiation. When they were finally alone, Jackson let out a long breath. "Well, that was different." Katherine laughed. "Welcome to my world. Think it made a difference?" She looked at him, this man who'd helped her find her way back to her company's true purpose, who'd stood his ground in a room full of corporate power players without losing himself. "I think," she said softly, "it's just the beginning." The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Aurora Technologies CEO and trucking company owner, business partnership, or something more. The photo accompanying the article showed Katherine and Jackson leaving the diner together, his hand hovering protectively near her back as they navigated through reporters. Katherine's PR team was in crisis mode, phones ringing off the hook with media requests. The narrative was irresistible. The billionaire CEO and the truck driver she met during her mysterious disappearance. Some outlets painted it as a romantic fairy tale, others suggested corporate scandal. "We need to get ahead of this," Thomas insisted during an emergency meeting. "Issue a statement clarifying that this is strictly business." Katherine, sitting at her desk reviewing partnership applications from other independent operators, looked up. "No, no!" Thomas blinked. "Katherine, the optics are exactly what they are," she finished. "Jackson and I are building something important here, both professionally and personally. I won't diminish either relationship to make the board more comfortable." Her phone buzzed, a message from Jackson. "Linda's showing me every article she finds. Says she always knew I'd end up in the tabloids somehow." Despite the chaos, Katherine smiled. They'd decided early on to face this their own way, with the same honesty that had marked their first conversation in his truck. The elevator chimed, and Jackson stepped into her office, looking somewhat out of place but carrying himself with quiet confidence. "Thought you might need lunch," he said, holding up a paper bag. "Marie insisted on packing it herself. Says corporate food can't be trusted." Katherine's assistant gaped at this breach of protocol, but Katherine just laughed. "She's not wrong. Join me." They sat by the window overlooking the city, sharing the diner's famous meatloaf and talking about the morning's developments. The Independent Partnership Program had received applications from over 50 small transport companies in the first week alone. "Dad had a good day today," Jackson said softly. "Showed him the partnership agreement. He understood enough to be proud." Katherine reached across the desk to squeeze his hand. "He should be proud of the business and of you." "Ms. Morgan," her assistant interrupted apologetically. "Tech Giant's CEO is on line 1. He's not happy about the partnership program." "Announcement." "Let him wait," Katherine said, surprising herself with how little she cared about corporate power plays now. "This is more important." Jackson studied her face. "You've really changed, you know that?" "Not changed," she corrected. "Just remembered who I was supposed to be all along. You helped me find that again." A commotion in the outer office drew their attention. Linda burst in, waving her phone. "Have you seen this? Tech Giant stock is dropping. The market loves the partnership program idea. They're calling it conscious capitalism and innovative industry reform." Katherine and Jackson exchanged looks. "Seems the world was ready for something different," he said. Speaking of different, Katherine stood, decision made. "What do you think about moving our next partnership meeting? To where?" "The diner. Marie's pie makes everything better, and I think some of these corporate types could use a taste of the real world." Jackson's laugh filled the office, drawing startled looks from passing employees. "Now that I'd pay to see. Thomas Davidson eating at a truck stop? He'll survive." Katherine gathered her things. "Besides, it's time these worlds stopped being so separate." As they headed for the elevator, Katherine could feel eyes on them. Executives, employees, visitors, all watching this unlikely pair. But for the first time in her career, she didn't care about appearances or expectations. She'd found something real, something that bridged both her worlds, and she wasn't going to hide it. "You know," Jackson said as they reached his truck, still parked defiantly between luxury cars in the executive lot, "when I picked up a stranded woman in the rain, I didn't exactly expect all this." Katherine smiled, remembering that night that had changed everything. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never see coming. The media would keep talking, the industry would keep evolving, and there would be more challenges ahead. But as they drove through the city together, heading toward a future neither of them had imagined possible, Katherine knew one thing for certain. Some risks were worth taking, and some paths, though unexpected, led exactly where you were meant to be. 3 months later, coal transport services looked very different. The old office had been modernized with Aurora's technology, but Jackson had insisted on keeping the worn leather couch where his father used to nap between runs. New trucks joined. The fleet, each bearing both companies' logos. But Jackson's original rig remained his preferred vehicle. The partnership program had exceeded even Katherine's optimistic projections. Independent operators across the country were signing up, drawn by the promise of maintaining their independence while gaining the benefits of corporate resources. Aurora's stock had not only recovered but reached new highs, with analysts praising the innovative approach to industry consolidation. "You should see some of these applications," Katherine said one evening, curled up on the couch in Jackson's office. "Family businesses going back 4-5 generations. All of them thought they'd have to sell out eventually. Now they're seeing another way forward." Jackson looked up from where he was teaching Linda the new logistics software. "Had 3 drivers stop by today, wanting to know if the rumors were true, if they could really keep their independence and still compete." "And what did you tell them?" Katherine asked, though she already knew the answer. "Told them to ask Marie. She's seen the whole thing unfold." He grinned. "That diner's become quite the business hub since you started holding meetings there." It was true. The Big Rig Diner had become an unofficial meeting point for the new partnership program. Marie had taken it all in stride, serving pie to corporate executives and truck drivers alike, treating everyone with the same straight-talking warmth. Katherine's phone buzzed, another interview request, this time from Forbes. They wanted to feature her and Jackson in a cover story about reimagining business relationships. Industry pioneers, they called them, though Jackson still laughed at the term. Just trying to do right by the people who built this industry. He'd said in their last interview, "Katherine gave us the tools, but the heart was always there." The media had finally tired of the romantic angle. focusing instead on the business innovation. Though there were still occasional articles about the CEO and the truck driver who'd found love on a stormy highway, most now talked about the successful merger of corporate resources with independent spirit. Linda interrupted Catherine's thoughts. "Dad's asking for you both. It's a good day. He remembers everything." They drove to the nursing home together in Jackson's truck. Katherine had learned to climb in gracefully now, though she still preferred to let Jackson handle the actual driving. Some skills she'd learned were better left to the experts. The highway stretched out before them, a ribbon of possibility, cutting through the gathering dusk. Katherine sat in the familiar passenger seat of Jackson's truck, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded her of that first stormy night. "Sure about this?" Jackson asked, though he already knew her answer. "A CEO should understand every part of her business," she replied with a smile. "Besides, I miss our night drives." They were taking a load to Chicago together, Catherine's idea of a working vacation. The truck's trailer bore both their company's logos, Coal Transport Services and Aurora Technologies, a visual representation of how their worlds had merged. "You know," Jackson said, "if someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be running a modernized fleet while dating a CEO, you'd have told them they were crazy?" Katherine finished, laughing. "About as crazy as me telling someone I'd fall in love with a truck driver who taught me more about business than any corporate advisor ever did." The word love hung in the air between them, comfortable and true. They'd stopped trying to define their relationship by conventional terms long ago. Like the partnership program they'd created, it was something unique, a bridge between worlds that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. As darkness fell and the truck's headlights cut through the night, Katherine thought about paths chosen and chances taken. Sometimes the greatest journeys started with a broken-down car and an act of kindness. Sometimes love looked like a truck-stop diner and a shared piece of pie. And sometimes, if you were brave enough to trust your heart, you found that the distance between two worlds wasn't as far as everyone thought. "Ready for the long haul?" Jackson asked softly. Katherine reached over and took his hand. "Always."